Hey, welcome everybody to End Times Bible Study. My name's Diane, and this is a weekly in-person live Bible study, and we live stream it through Facebook, and then it's posted to YouTube the next day. So we are currently on the book of Daniel. We are covering chapter 11, part 2, and this is an amazing prophecy that Daniel was given by an angel. And tonight is titled Antiochus and the Antichrist, and we will be covering verses 21 through 45. And so the prophecy starts off with covering information about the Persian Empire. It's mainly through the Greek Empire for the chapter, with the king of the north, which is the Seleucid ruler, and then the king of the south, which is the Ptolemy ruler, and they were the two of the Greek generals that took over those portions after Alexander the Great died. So we are going to pick up with, but the stuff we covered last week, we saw that this was all fulfilled. We can correlate it with the known history, and it shows the exact fulfillment of these prophecies that were written several hundred years prior to when they happened. So that's very cool. And so tonight we'll cover Antiochus, Epiphanes, and we will see that there is historical facts that correlate with him. And then it's going to morph directly into the Antichrist by verses 36 through 44, and those still have a future fulfillment to come. So, all right, so this is a quick review on kind of the big picture, because in going through, I love that we've done this chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and this pattern emerged from doing this, which was in chapter 7 through 12 is basically the kind of the mostly prophetic section of Daniel. And so we saw in chapter 7 the four beasts, which represented four world empires, which actually correlated with Nebuchadnezzar's dream from chapter 2 that Daniel had interpreted. So the four empires is Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. So we see the little horn in Daniel 7:8, that is the Antichrist. And then in that was Daniel 7. Then in Daniel 8, we see again a whole prophecy dealing with Medo-Persia being conquered by Greece. We see Alexander the Great, the empire being divided into four sections, and we see a ruler arising from what actually is the Seleucid Empire, which was Antiochus. But again, the prophecy seemed to go beyond Antiochus to the Antichrist. So we see Antichrist again. Daniel 9, 26 through 27, Antichrist. Then chapters 10 through 12, all part of the same narrative. So chapter 10, Daniel has this vision of this angel, a mighty angel, and he's very overcome by it. And then the angel in chapter 11 starts giving him this whole prophecy that then goes through chapter 12. So it's all the same narrative. But again, we see the same thing we saw in chapter 8, which is tonight we're going to be talking about Antiochus, correlating him. And then it's still like the same, it still seems like it's the same king, and but now it's the Antichrist. So it's the exact same pattern we see in 8. So it's just interesting how that works out. So if we have time, which actually this lesson runs really long, so maybe we won't, but chapter 8, like if you wanted to review like verses 8 through 12 and 20 through 25, those are like the pertinent verses. All right, so again, this is Daniel's fourth and final vision. It's the third year of King Cyrus of Persia. It's 536 BC, 69 years after Judah had been conquered by Babylon, and the first exiles were taken to Babylon from Judah, Jerusalem, and Daniel was in that first group. So at this point, then the Medo-Persian Empire had conquered Babylon, so the Persians are in charge. So Daniel was at least 82 at this point, assuming age 13 when he went into exile, which is actually unknown. So he's up there. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with verse 21, and then I have this background on Antiochus Epiphanes. We'll read 21, and then we'll cover that because it's really more pertinent after we read it. So we saw that prior to this we had the one king who was killed, and so in his place, and now this is Antiochus, a despicable person will arise. Royal honors will not be given to him, but he will come in a time of peace and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So here's some background on Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the Seleucid ruler, and again, this is the little map. So this is the Seleucid Empire here. This is the Ptolemy Empire. So if you're looking at it on the video, it's backwards, but Egypt is over here. And then this is like, you know, Syria. And Israel was right in between. So at this point, for this map, the Ptolemies were controlling Israel, but under Antiochus, he was controlling Israel. So it would flip back and forth, and they were constantly having all these wars and battles. So anyways, that's the map. So Antiochus reigns from 175 to 164 BC at a time when the Syrian power was waning and Rome was rising. And if you recall from history, eventually Rome conquered the whole Grecian Empire. So his brother, Seleucus IV, was in power, and then he was apparently poisoned by Heliodorus and died. So we covered that last time. I mean, some sources say he did poison him for sure, and then others were a little more nebulous, so it's hard to say. But at any rate, the most legitimate heir to the throne then was not Antiochus. It was Demetrius, the young son of Seleucus, who was being held as a hostage in Rome. And that's what you remember from history. Often, you know, you'd have like, okay, you send your kid over here or some relative to ensure good behavior or whatever. So they would grow up somewhere else away from their parents. But he did have there was an even younger son, Antiochus, a baby in Syria. So Antiochus Epiphanes was in Athens, Greece, when he found out his brother had died. So he was like, oh, great, I'll trot back to Syria. I'll pretend, you know, I'm going to be the guardian of the baby. And then, you know, he secured the throne through various intrigues. And the baby was murdered by a fellow named Andronicus. And then that guy was put to death by Antiochus. But there's rumors that maybe Antiochus was behind the whole ploy, which seems plausible. So at any rate, that was so that fulfills that. I mean, he is a despicable person. He really wasn't the true heir, and he seized the kingdom by intrigue. So verse 22. So now we're going to be doing the tour Egypt. So did you bring your handout from last time? I do you have one? This is oh, you do? Okay, I do have the original one that I used to, that could be. But the tour Egypt, let me just show it to give credit, but this is put out by Creation Ministries International. I think because they do a tour in Egypt, and this is the booklet that goes along with their tour. But they have a whole chapter on Daniel 11, so that's, I guess, because so much of it with the Ptolemy kingdom and so forth. Okay. Oh, and just also to mention, and I think we said this last week, but it seems like with Antiochus, there's some who believe the fulfillments cease to be historical and instead point exclusively to a still future person. So some people say, well, this is just the Antichrist altogether. But it did seem like these portions did have a correlation in history. And then some think that, you know, that basically this is like a foreshadowing, which that's what I'm kind of thinking. I feel like Antiochus does seem to have fulfilled it up to verse 30, through verse 35. But I wonder if it could, I feel like it also has a future fulfillment as well. So that's, you know, so there's a lot with all of this. And even with some of the things we're going to cover tonight, once we get to verse 36, there's all sorts of different opinions, and no one could really look at me and say, oh, well, you're just wrong, or, you know, because no one really knows for certain how all this is going to play out. And even with all the different, I looked at a lot of different sources and commentaries, and there's a lot of different opinions, as with all the stuff that's interpretive. So, all right. So let's go back to, so we're done with that. All right, so then it says that, then a flood of forces will be swept away before him and destroyed along with a prince of the covenant. So there were some troops of Heliodorus who he had to subdue. I guess they weren't too happy with Heliodorus being poisoned. And then there were some Egyptian forces that said, okay, hey, this is a great time for us to try to take back an area called Coel, Syria, soon after Antiochus ascended the throne. So he had some things there. But, you know, again, there was always all this fighting and back and forth. So, but the prince of the covenant was likely the devout high priest Onias III. And Antiochus accepted a bribe from Onias's brother Jason to depose Onias and make Jason high priest instead. So he didn't kill him, but he just, you know, bribed Antiochus. But then in 171 BC, some guy named Menelaus pledged an even higher sum. So Antiochus gave him the high priesthood, even though he was not a member of the high priestly family, and Menelaus had Onias assassinated. So that's probably what it's referring to. The prince of the covenant was this high priest. And then it says, and from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully and shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come to the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. So, you know, apparently through history, Antiochus was making treaties and breaking them whenever it suited him. And he also gratuitously distributed wealth and gifts in order to gain favor. And so I guess his behavior was somewhat erratic. So he was, you know, his name Antiochus Epiphanes means God manifest, but he had a nickname which was Epiphanes, meaning madman. So, yeah, so he apparently was a little bit crazy. And then in verse 25, and he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south, so the Ptolemy king, with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break with him, meaning the Ptolemy king. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So after Ptolemy the sixth Philometor became king of Egypt, the sixth Syrian war. Sixth, okay, so they keep having these Syrian wars. That broke out, and that was from 171 to 168 BC. So Antiochus learned of Ptolemy's plans to take back Palestine, because as you could see on that one chart, they had been in charge of Palestine and Israel previously. So, so he found out about that, so he preemptively marched against Egypt. And then Antiochus captured Ptolemy and conquered most of Egypt, but not Alexandria. There, the city leaders declared Ptolemy's younger brother, Ptolemy the Eighth, Physcon, to be king. Verse 27. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. I kind of love that verse just because doesn't that remind you so much of like the politicians and these world leaders who meet with each other, and even that whole Ukraine thing or whatever treaty they had made back, and it was like Angela Merkel came out like a year, like within the past year, and said, oh yeah, we never intended, you know, like Ukraine was supposed to like whatever, you know, like, and they just used it as time to build up Ukraine's forces instead of honoring what the treaty actually was, which was with Russia. And, you know, it just seems like this is the commonplace. They speak lies to each other. Mm-hmm. But again, notice, you know, the end is yet to be at the time appointed. There's a lot of references here about, you know, time's being appointed, the end will come when it's appointed. So Antiochus feigned support for Ptolemy VI, Philometor's rightful claim to the throne, and they made an alliance. Antiochus set him up in Memphis as a rival king to his brother. Yet neither intended to abide by the agreement because both wanted sole control of Egypt. And the alliance quickly fell apart when Ptolemy VI reconciled with his brother Ptolemy VIII through their sister Cleopatra II. For a time, all three ruled Egypt jointly. So Ptolemy VI began work on the temple of Kamambo, and you can see his reliefs there. And then Cleopatra II, and remember Cleopatra VII is the famous one. Cleopatra II also can be seen on multiple panels there together with her brothers Ptolemy VII and Ptolemy VI and Ptolemy VIII. She was also married successively to both of these brothers. I guess not at the same time, but I don't know how that really worked out. So yeah, but that's, that was how these people would do stuff back then. So, all right. So then in verse 28, if you're just tuning in, we're on Daniel 11, and we're at verse 28 right now. We're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. So Antiochus, on his way back to Syria in 169 BC, stopped by Jerusalem with his army and plundered the temple as described in 1 Maccabees 1 and 2 Maccabees 5. Verse 29. At the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Keaton shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and he shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. So the Ptolemy brothers were no longer serving Antiochus's purpose by battling each other. So in 168 BC, Antiochus invaded Egypt a second time. So while Antiochus was besieging Alexandria, a Roman fleet intervened and forced him to withdraw. So Keaton, this says it refers to lands northwest of Israel connected to the Mediterranean. Apparently it's also could really be referencing Rome, because from Rome they would come through past Keaton, wherever that was, somewhere over there in the western Mediterranean. And the Septuagint actually translate the ships of Keaton as the Romans. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So it might be kind of more of a roundabout way of, because that's who intervened. I mean, because what happened was this Roman general or Roman commander, Gaius Popilius Laenus, he came down to Alexandria and, went to greet Antiochus. Antiochus tries to shake his hand or whatever, and he wouldn't have any of it. And he's like, you need to read these letters, these things I have. And basically the Roman Senate was like, you can't invade Egypt. Like, they were telling Antiochus he had to go back. So Antiochus was kind of like, well, okay, I'll consult my other, people about it. And this, what's his name again? Popilius, he's like, no. He took his cane and drew a circle around Antiochus and said, you can't, I need your answer before you step out of this line. And so that's where we get the expression, they drew a line in the sand. So next time you hear that, it's like that was Antiochus Epiphanes that came from. So Antiochus was pretty much forced to capitulate, and so he said, okay, he would submit to the Roman Senate, and he, so I'm sure he's not too happy. This is like a major blow to his ego and what he's trying to do. And so he's livid. And so he goes back through Israel on his way home, and he attacks Jerusalem and began his vicious persecution of the Jewish people. He demanded that they be Hellenized or become Greek, outlawing Jewish religious practices such as circumcision, feasts, Sabbaths, and sacrifices on penalty of death. So he was extremely brutal, and you know, if you read the Maccabees, it's pretty awful. Like, you know, the mothers, they had their little boy circumcised. They basically killed the mom and the child, and you know, it was really horrendous persecution that broke out. And you know, you also had Jews who were going along with it. You know, the compromisers who were like, okay, well, we don't want to die, and okay, yeah, we'll worship the Greek gods, and we'll abandon all the practices of Israel, you know, all the things that God told us to do. So then it says in verse 31, forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. And I thought that was interesting that it says forces from him shall appear. So was this like his troops that showed up that under his direction who did this? But at any event, they took away the offering and they desolated the temple. So 1 Maccabees 1 and 2 Maccabees 6 describe how this happened. Antiochus offered unclean sacrifices, probably pigs, on the altar and set up a statue of Zeus in the temple. And in Matthew 24:15, in the parallel passage in Mark 13:14, Jesus makes reference to this verse as well. So varying eschatological perspectives understand this in different ways, but Jesus referred to the abomination of desolation as an event that was still to occur in the future. As mentioned above, some deny that Daniel's prophecy refers to Antiochus and use Jesus' teaching as supporting evidence. Those who see the prophecy as initially referring to an event of Antiochus' time may see it as a type of the event that Jesus predicted, or they may take Daniel's prophecy to have multiple fulfillments. And then in verse 32, he shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. So basically the people who went along with him, he's, you know, they're in good. You know, he's given them whatever and flattery and who knows what else. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. Verse 33, and the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. And I kind of wonder if that's, if you think about it, even like right now, like those of us who are the remnant, you know, the believers that are doing our best to hold to the truth of the Bible and interpret it correctly, we're able to help others, you know, the wise among the people shall make many understand. Like that's kind of our job, to be trying to proclaim the truth of Jesus Christ. And you know, it's like we have the knowledge, and maybe they had Daniel's prophecies, maybe they understood, and you know, so they're trying to help the people stand firm and do the right thing. Like, was that kind of their role? And I feel like that's a role that we could still have now. You know, do you ever see those, like, I don't know, I just saw a clip this week of a rapture movie, and that, you know, it's just right after the rapture's occurred, so you know, chaos ensues and things are crashing and burning and the people have disappeared, and it literally brought me to tears, because I felt so bad for the people that were left behind. And you know, that's where I was like, gosh, you know, we're not here. I always have that feeling like I want to be here so I can help the people that are still left. And who knows if we're wrong about the rapture. I mean, to me, I don't believe in the rapture because that's what I want to believe. It's because I think that is what the Bible is teaching. But we'll see. But even if we are taken out and that the rapture does occur as we believe it will, there will still be the 2 witnesses in Jerusalem and the 144,000 Jewish witnesses that will be sealed by God and sent to bring forth a witness. And you know, the people will not be left without a witness, and many will come to faith at that time. So, all right, so where were we? So when they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. So that to me is a little hard to really understand what that means about like who's giving them a little help and who's trying to flatter them. Because, you know, if it's talking about the whole situation with Antiochus, it's like, okay, you're getting killed if you're not you know, falling in line with Antiochus. So, I don't know. I didn't really see a lot in the commentaries. Even this just said many Jews resisted Antiochus's demands, and some paid with their lives. The historical books of Maccabees describe this in detail. A man named Mattathias and his sons, particularly Judah Maccabee, led a revolt against Antiochus IV and the Jews who had abandoned God's law and become Hellenized. So, you know, you're just fighting on two fronts. And it does make you feel like today we're fighting against, you know, professing Christians who have compromised. And the church is in such disarray with so much false teaching that has crept in. And so you're trying to deal with that in addition to the evil forces that are actually the satanic forces we're up against. So, but the Jews eventually did secure their independence, around 110 BC, but Israel was conquered again by the Romans in 63 BC, thus setting the stage for the arrival of the Messiah. So, all right, so that's the end of that information, because now we're going to get to, whoops, I'm on the wrong page here. All right, so now we're on Daniel. I mean, did anyone have any comments or questions on that, or anybody have anything you want to say before we move on?
I think I have a question over the time that you answered it.
Oh, it got answered? Okay, well, that's good. That's always great. All right, so now starting with verse 36, there's a clear shift here, and this definitely seems to be talking about the Antichrist at this point. So beginning with this verse, Daniel described events that have never been fulfilled historically. So, you know, as we went through that, there were things in history that seemed to correlate. But notice that, let's read verse 36. It says, then the king will do as he pleases and will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and he will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been decreed must be accomplished. So there's some very interesting points here. Number one, starting in verse 21, we have the despicable person who will arise. That's the king of the north. That's Antiochus Epiphanes, as apparently through history. So now it's like, then the king. It's like still talking about, so, you know, so it seems it's still talking about the same person. That's where it's just, to me, amazing how it just morphs right into the Antichrist. And that's what we saw with chapter 8 as well. So what does all that mean? And also it says, it talks about his blasphemy. So we'll correlate that in a minute with Revelation 13. But also, he will be successful until the time of wrath is completed. Now, what is the time of wrath? The tribulation. Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, there was nothing about Israel at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes being under any time of wrath. They just fell under persecution. I mean, just like under Hitler, there was like no time of wrath, but the Jews were grossly persecuted. So the time of wrath is the tribulation. And so it's saying, you know, the Antichrist he's going to be successful with what he's doing until his time's up. And he's got 3.5 years, basically. You know, I mean, he comes to power at the beginning of the tribulation, but he really doesn't fully consolidate his power, it seems to me, until about 3.5 years in, when he commits the abomination that causes desolation. He sets himself up as God in the temple, proclaims himself to be God, stops the temple sacrifice, institutes the mark of the beast, and requires all to have his, you know, his name, his mark, his number to buy and sell or be killed. So that's all like midpoint and on of the tribulation. So, and then again, it says, for what has been decreed must be accomplished. So let's just flip over to Revelation 13 really quick, and we'll see how that correlates, because the beast from the sea, that's the Antichrist, and that's really Revelation 13 is where we get the bulk of our information about him in Revelation. Although the tribulation kicks off in Revelation chapter 6:1 with the rider on the white horse, and that is also the Antichrist coming. So, but it says down in verse 5, the beast was given a mouth to speak arrogant and blasphemous words and authority to act for 42 months. So that's the final 3.5 years. And the beast opened its mouth to speak blasphemies against God and to slander his name and his tabernacle, those who dwell in heaven. Then the beast was permitted to wage war against the saints and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life belonging to the Lamb who was slain. So notice the parallels there, because it's talking about midpoint. We know the midpoint of the tribulation, and that's actually from Daniel 9:27. That's when the abomination of desolation occurs and the temple sacrifice is stopped, and also confirmed again in by Jesus in Matthew 24. So that's midpoint of the tribulation. But notice how that's correlating with previously, where he stops the daily sacrifice. There's the abomination that causes desolation back in verse 31. Then the saints are given over into his hand. I mean, he's persecuting and killing all those who will not follow his agenda. And then notice that now in 36 about the blasphemy. He's going to speak monstrous things against the God of gods. So so that, to me, I don't know, you guys, do you see it? I mean, to me, I see that's a lot of correlations right there. And just also the time of wrath, the time of the end, the appointed time, all this wording definitely seems to be pointing to a future fulfillment. All right, so then there was also some interesting things, just as, what did Christian scholars throughout the centuries believe? And they've recognized that this was a future fulfillment starting in verse 36. And Jerome, Theodoret, and Martin Luther, among others, did identify this as the Antichrist. There was some who identified somebody else, but they all said this is the Antichrist. And Jerome believed that just as Christ had Solomon and other saints as types of his coming in the whole Old Testament, that's what it is types and shadows. That's all pointing to the Messiah. Even from King David to Abraham and Isaac, where he's going to sacrifice Isaac, all these different things, it's all types and shadows. So Jerome's theory was that the Antichrist also has a type of himself, an Antiochus, which that does make sense, because this guy persecuted the Jews and defiled the temple. And like I said, it's just how is this working? Where is this going in chapter 8 and chapter 11? Antiochus, Antichrist. I mean, it just morphing right into it. So that makes sense that if this is a type and shadow, but look how much of Daniel is really devoted to giving us this end times picture, which then correlates so beautifully with Revelation and Matthew 24 and some other things. So, all right. So then, what else would I want to say on that? Even the liberal commentators, who view verses 1 through 35 as history rather than prophecy, due to the accuracy, they're like, okay, this couldn't have been prophecy. This is obviously written after the fact because this is so accurate. So, but even they admit there's a sharp difference starting with 36 that's not fulfilled in history. So, so again, this is the Antichrist. And back to Daniel 7:23, it says that he shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces. So that was what was said about him in Daniel 7:23. But, and as far as Antiochus, I mean, he was just trying to make the Jews become Hellenized. He wanted them to act like Greeks. He wanted them to get rid of their own religion and worship the Greek pantheon of gods, like Zeus, you know. And he also, Antiochus did not trample down the whole earth. It was just still the same petty wars that had been going on for a couple centuries between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, fighting each other. I mean, he had no world power. He didn't trample down the earth. I mean, there's a lot of things you can see where it no longer fits Antiochus. So verses 37 through 38. So let's read those. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, nor for the one desired by women, nor for any other god, because he will magnify himself above them all. And in their place, oh, hey, Lois. Can you make sure she gets an outline? And in their place, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god his fathers did not know, with gold, silver, precious stones, and riches. We're at verse 38 right now. That's okay. We're glad you made it. Verse 39. He will attack the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him, making them rulers over many and distributing the land for a price. So again, that's sounding like what Antiochus was doing. He's like rewarding the people and, you know, distributing land and so forth. But some other things that jump out to me at this is like, okay, he's saying, I'm God. He's magnifying himself above every god, but yet it says with the help of a foreign god. You know, so it's like, okay, what does that mean? So, but back to where it says the God of our fathers, the word Daniel used for God there is the Hebrew word Elohim. So it's a name for God in general, applying to both the true God and to false gods. And some commentators have used this as proof that the Antichrist is Jewish. However, if Daniel was referring to the God of Israel, he would have used Yahweh, the Lord God of their fathers. And then Walvoord, that's the commentary I use extensively on Daniel. And it's on page 351, he gave a whole boatload. I put a few of his references down, but like Exodus 3, 15 through 16, 4, verse 5, etc. So he had a whole boatload of verses to back up saying that it would have been Yahweh if he was specifically trying to indicate the God of the Bible, you know, like the Jewish God. That's the word he would have used. And the other thing is, I mean, if somebody has a verse that says the Antichrist will be Jewish, feel free to show me that, because I know, like, Amir Sarfati, I love him. He's a Jewish believer, and I follow him on Telegram, and I've listened to a lot of his teachings and some of his books and so forth. And he thinks the Antichrist will be Jewish, but I don't see that it says that anywhere. And I feel like if you're looking at Daniel 9:27, which is the final 7-year period prescribed for Israel, the 70th seven, it says, and he, the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7-year period. But in the middle of the 7-year period, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of the temple will come the abomination that causes desolation until the decreed destruction is poured out upon them. So to me, it's like, this could just be some, you know, the Antichrist is like someone coming from the Roman Empire. So that's the revised Roman Empire that will exist. That's where the Antichrist comes from. But there's nothing to say that he will be. To me, it's not like the Jews are accepting this person as their Messiah. It's just saying, okay, this ruler, just like they gave Trump like the crown of Jerusalem recently. You know, I mean, if Trump were to, well, let's say he made a 7-year, I don't believe he's the Antichrist, but like, let's say he made a 7-year covenant with them and allowed them to rebuild their temple, which is what they're waiting for and all that. Then we would say, okay, yeah, that is the Antichrist. But with the Jewish people, they would just be like, oh, great, you know, a leader has given us permission to build our temple, which is what we want. And so they would not, I mean, to me, maybe I'm missing something, but I just don't see that they would be like, oh yeah, well, this is our promised Messiah, you know. So anyways, I don't know that that's what that's really.
Excuse me.
Oh, go ahead.
He's a young guy.
Oh, yeah.
Carl Schwab, he's
Yeah.
now, he knows the Bible really Really?
Oh, I've heard him pegged as a possible candidate for the Antichrist.
And so that could be a possibility because he's
Yes.
into the new world order,
Right.
but that's not going to happen, right? So
Yeah.
he's a young. Matter of fact, my future son-in-law got his book, and I said, "What are you reading?"
Oh my gosh.
Well, he
That's
reads.
interesting.
He reads a lot.
Well, you know,
Ask him.
sometimes it's good to read what, I mean, I actually bought the book, The Great Reset, that was, I think, written by Klaus Schwab. I don't think I really got too far in it, but I've got it there for reference if I need it. But, you know, it is good to know what they're saying. And that guy's like, what's his name? Is like Harav or something like that. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think the guy's actually like an atheist, but people have been pegging him as a possibility for like a false Messiah. But
Those people, when they do say know the Bible, they know that's why they go after that.
yeah, I know. I was watching one thing, and I don't know how true this is, but there's some guy supposedly former Illuminati, but he's saying that what the Illuminati has been fearing for years is the rapture of the church, and that's why, like, they believe it. And so that's why this whole alien thing is coming up, because they are going to have to come up with a way to explain millions of people disappearing, and so they'll blame the aliens. And that can also be something that would then unite. Oh, we have to unite to fight the aliens. And look at all these alien movies, but that's the theme. Yes, Harari. Yes. Yeah, so I have seen a little bit about him, but you know, I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know that the Messiah, their Messiah, yes, would need to be someone of Jewish who would fit their criteria, but is the person who's confirming is the Antichrist, is that really who they're going to be considering as the Messiah? You know, it might even be the false prophet. Maybe the false prophets.
There's many, and it's not Trump. Trump was anointed like Cyrus, like God anointed people. He was anointed to come, and people are going to find out. The underground tunnels, all that is going to come out. It's going to come out.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Yeah, so all that still has to play out.
But
So
he is not, of course, they said he was. I mean,
he's not a what?
They said he was the, he's the Antichrist.
Oh, well, people are still saying that now. Yeah, but anyways, but that was just a way of like an example. But okay, so back to where this, we got to get back to the outline because this is a really long lesson. So, where was I? Okay, so the gods of the Father. So then another way, as far as just when it says neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, the God that his father, so that's really saying the God that his fathers or ancestors had worshipped. That is, he would not be bound or restrained by the religion of his own land or by any of the usual laws of religion. He would worship any God that he pleased or none as he pleased. And that was from Barnes' Notes on the Bible. And the one beloved by women, Dean, do you remember we were doing this before and we were trying to figure out what that meant when we were doing the Revelation Bible study? We looked at some of this. But I found out some interesting information on that, because apparently that actually may be a reference to Jesus himself, because godly Jewish women had a natural desire to become the mother of the promised Messiah. And the seed of the woman was promised, the Messiah was promised to come through the seed of the woman in Genesis 3:15. So the Antichrist, of course, since he's like the inverse, he hates God, he hates Jesus Christ. So that might be what that's referring to. Again, there's different theories. Some read into that more like homosexuality, which in this day and age, that really wouldn't be a surprise either. but anyways, it's hard to say. And then where it says he'll magnify himself above all gods, so he rejects the true God and all false gods and assumes deity for himself. And we saw that in Revelation 13 a few minutes ago. Now, then it says, but to me it's like, okay, I'm God, I'm, above all these other gods, but then there's like a God of fortresses, a God his father did not know, and then he's going to attack the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign God. So I'm like, well, okay, I thought he was saying he was God, so what does all that mean? But Walvoord felt like God of Fortresses was not really a person, but just the power to make war. And so his confidence is in military power personified as the God of Fortresses. However, I just wonder if Satan isn't also in view here, and even with the help of a foreign god. Like Satan may be the God of fortresses as well as the foreign god. And the reason I thought that was from Revelation 16. So this is the bowl judgments. Revelation 16 is the final. You've had the seal judgments, the seven seal judgments, the seven trumpet judgments. Now this is the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. You got the seven bowl judgments. And if we look over in verse 13, and we'll come back and cover some of this in a minute on the rest of it, but I saw 3 unclean spirits that looked like frogs coming out of the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So this is like the unholy trinity. Satan has already been identified in this chapter as the dragon. So you've got Satan the father, you have Antichrist the son, who also had this, injury to his head, and apparently it seemed like he died and came back to life, and that's in chapter 13. So it's kind of like this resurrection. And then you have the false prophet, who's like the false Holy Spirit, who's doing all these signs and wonders and miracles and things. So the fact that these 3 are all in tandem, and also it's very likely that Satan is indwelling the Antichrist during the last 3.5 years. I don't know if it ever specifically states that, but to me it's kind of implied. But anyways, these spirits, these demons come out that look like frogs, and it says these are demonic spirits that perform signs and go out to all the kings of the earth to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Okay, so I don't know. I was thinking that it could be, in addition, Satan is somewhat in play here with that. Any thoughts or comments? Did that seem? Yeah. So, okay. So then, verses 40 through 43. Walvoord titled, "This is the final world war erupts." At the time of the end, so time of the end, we're getting down here now to the end of the tribulation. The king of the south, so the Egyptian area, if you look at what was there, parts of Africa and Egypt, well, Egypt is in Africa too, but anyways, that maybe that's who's in this battle. But the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots, horsemen, and many ships, invading many countries and sweeping through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land, that's Israel, and many countries will fall. Now, and we know that from Luke chapter 21 and also Zechariah 14 that at midpoint of the tribulation, the Antichrist's forces are invading Israel. And that, with the whole abomination causes desolation, all that stuff. So there's a whole battle going on there. So this may be when this is taking place. And but these will be delivered from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the leaders of the Ammonites. So then you're like, okay, well, where is that? So I brought in, let's see, this is the Holy Land map, then and now. So let's see, so here's Israel. You have Edom, Moab, and Ammon right there. And then if you look over on the other side, that is actually in modern day, there's Israel, it's modern day Jordan. So that area, like in Jordan, the Antichrist, that's delivered from his hand. They are kept safe. Now, the interesting thing about how this correlates is because in Revelation 12, we see Israel fleeing, and also Matthew 24, Jesus says, we see the abomination causes desolation, get out, flee to the mountains. So they're leaving at that point, and they go off into the wilderness for the final 3.5 years where they're going to be taken care of. So this was really fascinating. It looks like they may be going to the ancient city of Petra. So I tried to find some better pictures, and I was annoyed because it's like, oh, they have an article on it. Well, this was the best picture. The pictures in the magazine were like crap. So, but if you Google it, you can get some other images. But it's I'll pass that around. But so this was like 2,000 years ago. A civilization called the Nabateans sprung up in South Edom, which is also known as Bozrah, which is the Hebrew word, in the area called Bozrah. So history doesn't know for sure where they came from or what caused them to disappear seemingly almost overnight, but they lived there for about 300 to 400 years, continually building, and they carved into the sandstone all this elaborate stuff and these amazing buildings. So Petra that's the Greek word for rock, and it has only one entrance that is a mile long, roughly 10 to 20 feet wide, with towering cliffs above reaching as high as 300 feet. So think about that. There's only one way in. It's a mile long, and no one's living there. I mean, you can go tour it. You know, tourists go and look at the whole thing. But it says that it could hold 5 million people when fully excavated. Yeah. So then it says, let's see here. Oh, so there's a verse in Isaiah 63, actually more than just 1 through 4, and I'll just read the first one. But who is this who comes from Edom from Bozrah with crimson-stained garments? And it's talking about, if you go read that whole passage, Isaiah 63, just go read like the first 10 chapters or whatever. It's talking about Jesus coming back and that his garments are stained red because he's treading the winepress, which again, that's what he's doing in Revelation when he comes back, the winepress of God's wrath, and he also comes back and kills all the forces of the Antichrist that are gathered against him. So it's like, okay, they're talking about Edom, Bozrah, Jesus' return. Is that where the Jewish people are going to go? Are they going to flee to Petra? So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah. So, all right. So back to this thing. So that was about Petra, and then let's see. So let's keep reading. All right. So those are delivered from his hand. He will extend his power over many countries, and not even the land of Egypt will escape. So eventually they get overrun as well. He will gain control of the treasures of gold and silver and over all the riches of Egypt, and the Libyans and Cushites will also submit to him. But news from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will go out with great fury to destroy many and devote them to destruction. He will pitch his royal tents between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain, but he will meet his end with no one to help him. So the beautiful holy mountain is, let me see another map. Okay, so they're saying it's probably like it's between, wait, what did he say exactly? A reference to, is best understood as a reference to Jerusalem situated between the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea. So that's the Dead Sea right there, that big lake, Mediterranean Sea, so somewhere. But you're close to Jordan, so I don't know, the Antichrist is somewhere in that vicinity, it appears, for the final battle. And we talked about this before, that when we did the Revelation study, and see if anybody remembers, because I can't remember what the upshot was, because the valley of Megiddo is like all the way up here, but this seemed to be placing the whole final Armageddon farther south. And does anybody remember how? I need to go back and look up my notes, because we were like, okay, we think the Battle of Armageddon is actually far, like this location we just talked about, not actually up to the north. So, anyways, but and then we see that, he comes to his end with no one to help him. We see in Revelation 19 that Jesus comes back and he and the false prophet are cast alive into the lake of fire. So, there is no help is available at that point. But I was like, okay, that he has news from the east and the north alarms him. So to the east, we know that's the Asian, China, all those Asian areas. But like, I don't know how old this map is, but okay. And this is just like Europe. So wait, let me see, where is Israel? Okay, Turkey, Jordan. Okay, so Israel is like right down here. Okay, so now if you're going straight north, you run into Turkey, Ukraine, Russia. That is exactly to the north of Israel. And so I'm just wondering if, okay, are people Russia, people in China, or because this is like a revised Roman Empire. And the other thing is, why would they be rebelling against the Antichrist rules? So we're going to flip back really quick to Revelation 16, because the bowls of wrath are being poured out, and I'm just wondering if like people are kind of like, we're being forced to take this mark, we're forced to do all this stuff, and this is not really working out very well for us because look and see what happens. The first bowl, all of those who have the mark of the beast and worshipped its image, loathsome malignant sores broke out on them. So now you're wondering, I know it's just like horrendous to think about, and you're wondering, okay, they're killing all those who refuse to take the mark. Are they noticing that, these people who are not taking the mark don't have any sores, and we have this horrendous plague visited upon us? So do they start getting a clue maybe that like, this is a bad idea. We're like following this guy and this is not working out. Then the next two angels pour out their bowls, and basically all the water on the earth turns to blood. So now all they have to drink is blood. So it just keeps getting worse. The fourth angel pours out his bowl on the sun, which is given the power to scorch people with fire. And the people were scorched by intense heat. And they cursed the name of God, who had authority over these plagues, yet they did not repent and give him glory. So once again, now they're burning up. The sun is like it sounds like it's catching people on fire. I mean, it sounds really awful. Then the fifth angel pours his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness, and men began to gnaw their tongues in anguish and curse the God of heaven for their pains and sores, yet they did not repent of their deeds. So again, we talked about this before. We were unclear, is it just on whatever the Antichrist kingdom is, which I felt like was a revised Babylonian empire. And back to the maps, let's see, maybe that's not the best one. Let me look at this map. The Seleucid Empire actually includes Babylon. I mean, if they do a revised Babylon, I mean, it falls in there. And also I want you guys to notice the action is taking place in the Middle East on all this. I mean, it's around Israel, it's in this area, it's these, the fighting, these different wars that are happening. It's not mentioning the United States, so, just as an FYI, but anyways, we were unclear if it's just going to be wherever his actual headquarters is, his kingdom, or is it the entire world? Like what's exactly plunged into darkness? So that was unclear. But the sixth angel pours his bowl out on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east. So then that's when we have the unclean spirits going out to summon all evil to Armageddon, basically. But and then it ends with, and they assembled the kings in the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. The seventh bowl of wrath then is where there's this horrendous earthquake, the cities of the earth all collapse. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath, which that appears to be what's described in chapter 18, where they talk about the specific destruction. And then there was also great hailstones weighing almost 100 pounds each rained down on them. So, and men cursed God for the plague of hail because it was so horrendous. So they continued to curse God all throughout all these things. So, so the kings of the east was this like, all right, so are these like were they actually on their way to maybe fight against the Antichrist, you know?
Yeah.
And then once, that was a theory postulated, so it's hard to say, because I always took it that they were just all kind of united and they were just gathering and they were just going to be fighting against Jesus when he returns, but maybe they were being gathered for other reasons. I mean, not other reasons, but, you know, like in their minds, like, oh, I'm gonna go there to try to fight against the Antichrist. And the news from the north and the east is alarming the Antichrist. I don't know. I mean, that's just kind of speculative there, but anyways, I think that's pretty much the end of the chapter there. So, yeah. Let's see if I had anything else I wanted to cover. It was like a lot of just cool information. So, but I was trying to cut it a little bit short because this was like a long lesson. When I was rehearsing it, it was like over an hour. So we actually kept it to an hour, so that's pretty good. So, yeah, but takeaway, I mean, anybody have a takeaway or comments or questions? Yeah, it's going to be brutal. Yeah, I agree. It's horrendous. Yeah, I think the takeaway for me is just what we've said in the past. God's fulfilled all these other, you know, prophecies. These will be fulfilled as well. God is in control. We see where it's appointed times. You know, it's all going to play out as God has ordained it to play out. So that's a reassuring thought. You know, even though it's going to be awful, it's like, you know, there's an end in sight. We know how long it'll be going, and that sort of thing. So, but yeah,
Can store that much food.
You don't think you can store that much food?
I've got a lot of food, but I don't think I can store that much.
Yeah, I know. And I was thinking about it today. I was like, wow, if you were here when this happened and you're not Jewish, would it be better to go over to Israel and evacuate with all of them out to Petra? You know, or you're here in America and you're just kind of like, oh, let's go hide out in the hills and live off the land or something. But I mean, it's going to be pretty rough. I mean, I think it's going to be pretty hard to escape it. But there are people who do survive the whole tribulation, because those are the people that don't take the mark of the beast. There will be some who survive, and they will be going into the millennial kingdom. You know, Jesus will set up his kingdom on earth. So you'll have all those Jewish people that were in Petra. They'll be then going into the millennial kingdom, and anybody else who manages to survive without taking the mark, that's a believer, they'll go in. The rest of them will all face judgment for having the mark. So, you know, yeah, so I think the main takeaway is, if you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, today's the day. So repent of your sins, believe on Jesus as the Son of God who came to earth, lived a perfect sinless life, and then died a horrible death on the cross and paid for all of our sins so we could be forgiven. And he offers that as a free gift. So we just need to accept it and follow Jesus. So, all right, any other comments or questions? No. You guys are all so quiet. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next week. We are doing the Bible study on Wednesday nights from now on, if you're still with us and you're rewatching this. All right. Y'all take care. God bless.